Let's begin. Now, just so you are aware, you probably already expect this, but there's going to be about a 5 to 10 second delay between our conversations on what's being live streamed on YouTube.
Cool.
Okay, it's working. Okay, welcome everybody to the second day of the Edinburgh Anarchist Feminist Book Fair. Okay, I'll start over, sorry. Welcome to the second day of the Edinburgh Anarchist Feminist Book Fair 2021. This is Resisting the G7 Summit. If you're joining for the first time, please take a moment to take a look at our Safer Space Agreement, which I'll post in the chat. And also this book event is made possible by people giving their time and labor. And if you are willing to give us any donations, I will also be adding the donation button in the chat below. All of the proceeds will go to organizers and speakers directly, so you can find it there. And also at the end of each event, would like to hear feedback from you so we can improve in future years, and the link for that will also be in the chat. So thanks everyone for joining, and without further ado, I'll hand it over to Peter. Thank you.
Hi there. Morning everybody. Thank you for having us at Edinburgh Anarchist Feminist Book Fair. You do great stuff. My name is Peter. I'm with the Anarchist Federation. I'm joined today by Sam, who's from Kill the Bill, Cornwall. The way we're going to do this is I'm just going to give a little bit of an introduction to our organizations, and then I'm going to possibly bore you with some of the information about what the G7 is and why it should be opposed. And then Sam's going to fill you in with what's happening from the 9th of June and how the Resist the G7 coalition is organizing. I've not had much sleep, so forgive me if I and ah. The Anarchist Federation, we've been around for 35 years in the UK. We're part of the International of Anarchist Federations, and we act as a kind of like a propaganda organization and a networking community for anarchists on this lovely island of ours, and generally try and get ourselves stuck in a bit of trouble. Sam?
So I'm here from Kill the Bill, Cornwall. So we obviously formed recently as part of the network of groups across the country opposing the police crime and sentencing bill. And we've been out on the streets, I think, 7 times over the last couple of months, which for Cornwall is amazing. And actually one of the things that has come out of organising against the G7 is movements like Kill the Bill Cornwall and having that space for radical organising in Cornwall. So it's actually been quite an exciting time in terms of what we can build down here. So, and I can sort of talk a bit more about that later in terms of the coalition as well that's come together.
Cool. Okay, so the G7, what is it and why should we oppose it? Well, the G7 actually stands for the group of 7 countries. Those countries are Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the United States of America. And it's always joined, well, for the past few years, it's always been joined by the EU Commission and Council, as well as usually there's a nominal few different countries who get an invite. The G7 started as a shadowy backroom organization between the foreign ministers of several of the world's most largest and advanced economies. I'll put that advanced in quotations. We'll come back to the reason why later. They started as a small meeting in the library of the White House to discuss how the Western economic powers can manage and mitigate the harm from the fuel crisis, which happened in 1973. So what happened there at the time is there was an organization called the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries. and they placed an embargo against the states which supported Israel during the Yom Kippur War. And this included Canada, the US, and the UK. So during this time, the foreign ministers got together and they were like, okay, well, what can we do? We're the most powerful countries in the world. How can we control global finance and control global economy for our favor to ensure that our countries, do better and crush everybody else, basically? And this grew over the next few years to what we call the G7 now. And essentially it began to pull together these 7 Western economic powers to establish a hierarchy amongst people the world over. You have those with the greater power and those who are ideologically properly aligned on one side, and on the other side, you have the marginalized countries of the world. This includes all of the global South, much of Asia. We're talking, all of Africa, all of South America, Mexico, all this stuff. Most of what's called the Group of 77, that's an organization within the UN where the global South would act as a voting bloc against the top 7 countries. And so they started forming and plotting away and having all these kind of shenanigans going on. And they were mostly trying to encourage this idea of neoliberalism and the globalization of our economy, the deregulation of capitalism, the privatization of industries, particularly those countries that had state industries and state utilities. They were very keen to kind of like change the way that these countries work so that global corporations could infect those countries and take over and, install Western style democracies and Western economic models. This included notably the whole free trade stuff and budgetary austerity, which has devastated the working class the world over. This came to a point in 1980 when they were still, not in 1980, in the mid 80s, the world stage basically went, oh, hang on a minute, the 7 countries are getting together and on a twice yearly basis at the time, I think, and making all these plans to manipulate other countries in the world for their own favor. And they were forced to kind of come out of the shadows and make it like a formal organization, which is what they did from that point. And their whole branding, their ethos is about this beautiful neoliberal vision where we care about everybody in the world, where we're looking after you all, we're the custodians of our planet. And, if you go today on the G7 UK website, it looks like a social democrat's dream. Everything is beautiful, the promise of a green and bright future. And it's an insidious lie. And I'm going to go through that all in a little bit. But let me just carry on with like where it all came from. So the G7 has been operating since the mid 80s in this manner, and building up its power. The G7 countries control, I think it's 40% of the world's GDP at the moment, and they're incredibly powerful. They represent 1/10 of the population of the planet, and they've been carrying on in this way until 1999, when they formed they were part of the formation of the G20. And the G20 specifically is about global finance and central banks. And so they were one of the groups that helped form this. And in 2016, they officially handed over the economics policy creation to the G20, which basically left the G7 as it actually is. It's a global organization to bring around this idea of neoliberalism for the world and to enhance the power of the Western Bloc. So why is this bullshit? Well, the way it operates is it's more than just a gathering of the world's leaders. These 7, 9 leaders. It's a huge event full of hundreds and hundreds of diplomats and NGOs and the IMF and things like that come together, and they organize themselves in several ministerial groups. So at the G7, they have the trade summit, the interior summit, the health summit, the foreign development summit, the climate environmental summit, which is a big one this year, and the digital technologies and finance. And they also have their they're more holistic, they're more friendly facing engagement groups, as they call them, where they encourage like a youth council, a science council, a labor council, which was held in April, I think, the summit, which was run by the TUC, to talk about global labor and how we can help benefit the working class across the world. And other holistic lies like this, and this idea of civil society and this twisted vision of what was once like a, it's pretty important to Marxism and stuff like that. But since the fall of the Soviet Union has very much been twisted to this modern idea of kind of handing over responsibility for, the massive deprivation that half the world is going through to NGOs that we don't need to care about, that we can pass the buck on. And this year in particular, they've made a big point about how they're going to care for women and girls around the world, how they're going to solve like food crises and help, educate people around the world. And this is a complete fiction. If we look at the UK's aid cuts last year, right, despite what they're saying at the G7, there was 85% family planning aid cut. 110 million was removed from humanitarian aid in Yemen. They halved the aid that went to Syria. The global polio eradication program saw its budget from the UK drop from 100 million to 5 million. Our aid to Africa was reduced by 66%, from 2.2 billion to just 760 million. And the funding for girls' education was cut by 40%. And our water and sanitation aid was dropped by 80%. This is at the same time that they're talking about caring for the world and helping improve the situation for everyone over the world. So, it's a manufactured lie to encourage us to kind of bow down and like follow this kind of neoliberal fantasy that they're creating. And one of the major things that they're doing this year that they're not talking about much is the fact that they're building up an economic bloc in solidarity with the Indo-Pacific region. So, namely, there's a macroeconomic group called ASEAN, which is 10 of the countries in the Indo-Pacific region. I have the 10 here, but what are they? So yeah, so these 10 countries, Bahrain, no, that's not. Do you know what? I've stumbled over myself, so I'm just going to pretend I didn't stumble over myself and carry on there. But what they're trying to do is build alliances in Asia to combat the Chinese. So the Chinese government, the state capitalist system in China, has been investing millions upon millions of pounds in buying up mineral resources in both Africa and the Pacific region, but also financing and investing new projects, particularly around logistics and transport infrastructure and like communications companies and stuff like this. And they're doing it in a trade-off so that they can get more UN seats, so they can try and control the UN. Now, the G7, of course, are opposed to this because they want to control the UN. They're the top 7. Regardless of the fact that China is one of the world's biggest economies, they're not considered advanced enough to be allowed at the seat, apparently. So we have this huge trade war building, a huge Cold War around economy that, might turn hot, who knows. But this is one of the underlying things that's happening at the G7 under the UK's presidency. The other major thing is this idea of a global reset after pandemic, and the new net zero idea that they want the world to be carbon neutral by 2050. Now, this sounds like a great, fantastic idea. Who doesn't want the world to be carbon neutral? The problem is that, once again, it's a lie. It's not actually restoring forests. It's not actually, building a planet that is better for us. It's about growth. It's about capitalism. It's about expanding the timber industry and the agricultural industry, and so these massive corporations that are polluting the planet, the American military that's polluting the planet, they can just offset all their carbon by just paying in and planting a few trees that only live for 7 years. They're chopped down and just, sent back into the machine. And this is the nature of the governments that we deal with. This is the UK government, the US government, Canada. They're all involved in this giant this evil of capitalism. I'm sure we're an anarchist book fair. We all know the evils of capitalism, and this is the greatest face of capitalism on the planet, the G7, and by extension the Group of 20, which they hold most of the power in, really. Yeah. So the last time the G7 met was in France. The 45th summit was in France in, I'm going to murder this now, Biarritz, I think it was. And they deployed 15,000 police and military, and they battered the crap out of 6,000 protesters that came from around the world. Palestinian activists, Basque separatists, you had organizers from across France, Europe, America come and, try and say, hey, what you're doing isn't okay. What you're doing is destroying this planet. Despite your lies, you're crushing the working class. You're setting up this hegemony of global capitalism that benefits these 7 countries and their friends and nobody else. And, that's the entire nature of the system that we're trying to fight. Now, it's interesting that one of their friends, particularly this year, is India. So for those of you who don't know, India and China have been having some pretty spicy border conflict, while at the same time, the Prime Minister of India, I think it's Prime Minister, a fellow called Modi, he's currently bringing around neoliberalism into India. So he's privatizing industries, he's attacking the rights of the working class. He's bringing around all these social changes, which have ended up seeing the largest strikes that have ever happened in the world. 250 million people went on strike against these policies, and they were joined by hundreds of thousands of farmers who held a strike on the same day and descended on Delhi. And like, if you Google pictures of these, it's wild, the scale of these strikes. And we heard very little about them in UK because we don't like to talk about the working class around the world, do we? And that India's involvement. Now, Modi is a right-wing populist, right? And his whole thing is, rather than say people like Marine Le Pen or Trump, where they're kind of like apprehensive popularists, so they come in and go, oh, there's immigrants coming, we need to strengthen the borders, we need to reform, we need to build up our thing. He's an aspirational right-wing. He's saying, oh, well, if we bring together our capitalist dream, we can make India strong, and we can push back the Chinese, and we can join our global allies and benefit from capitalism and become, the power block in Asia. And what Modi is doing is like straight up, like there's ethnic tensions which he's pushing through, there's racial tensions that he's pushing through, religious tensions that he's pushing through, all to build what we in the UK are now calling this one nation conservatism, where we're all kind of supposed to ignore the fact that we come from a wide, diverse array of backgrounds and histories, and just tell ourselves that we're all obsessed with this idea of nation. Our nation is best, that we are the ones that should come together. Britain and every single little country is doing their own little version of this, and they went in on that. And this is a problem because the G7 essentially are just, you have 7 countries, maybe with three guests, and the EU, and they are deciding the future of the planet. They are deciding the framework which the rest of the planet are going to be forced to go along with. And this is counter to any idea of autonomy, any idea of liberty, any idea of working class solidarity around the world. And so we have to oppose it. And so that's what we're trying to do here now. What we're doing there is in Cornwall. We want to come together. The Cornwall is a reflection of this global crisis, as I'm sure Sam will go into once I stop blathering and ranting right now. So Sam, if you want to talk about what's happening in Cornwall and what the Resist G7 coalition are doing, and shut me up.
Yeah, sure. I don't want to shut you up, but I'm happy to talk about that. So I'm going to start by talking about Cornwall, because people have this view of Cornwall that it's this rich, idyllic place because we've got beautiful coasts, we've got a load of fancy restaurants, and it's really expensive to visit. But that's because Cornwall has been turned into a playground for the rich. Cornwall doesn't exist for the people who live here. House prices are astronomical. especially compared to the average wage, which is incredibly low. Before we left the EU, Cornwall was one of the only places in England, I think was the only place in England, and Wales was the other place that got Objective 1 funding, because we were one of the poorest places in Europe. The levels of poverty and deprivation here are massive. And it's the kind of forgotten Cornwall, because we are supposed to be serving the needs of tourists and second homeowners. And that's what we're supposed to be grateful for. So the message that we want to get across with the G7 as well is that we want to build a Cornwall that works for the people that live here, that works for our children. Our children have no choice but to leave. They can't afford to stay, and there's no jobs. There's nothing for them. There's no services. There's no infrastructure. Our public transport is unreliable. It's irregular, and it's incredibly bloody expensive. And we keep getting told that the G7 will be great for Cornwall because it's bringing money in. But it's not money that's coming to the people of Cornwall. It's not money that's coming to our estates. It's not money that's going to our food banks or to alleviate food poverty. It's money that's going into vanity projects. So like the last time Boris Johnson came to Cornwall, he announced all this money for a park in Truro. One of the things that he kept saying about this park was it would bring in more tourists. We don't need more tourists. We need a community. We've got villages that are ghost villages in the winter because all the homes are second homeowners. And it's really important for people coming to Cornwall to oppose the G7 to have in their heads this reality of what Cornwall is and not see the facade and the kind of like fancy restaurants and posh houses, because they don't exist for the people who live here because we can't afford to access them. The G7 is being held in this so-called eco hotel that's destroyed woodland on the coast to build meeting rooms for the G7 that the local community are outraged about. They've done it without planning permission, to build meeting rooms for this hotel that costs thousands of pounds a night, that has bottles of wine on sale that cost thousands of pounds, that local people cannot afford to go to and access. So everything that the G7 stands for, everything that my comrade's just been talking about, is a microcosm of what's happening in Cornwall. And one of the reasons why, for many of us in Cornwall, it's been really important to like build the resistance to the G7, but also have that link and to be constantly coming back to what is happening in our community in Cornwall and use that as an opportunity to let people know what the reality is for people down here. And it's one of the reasons it's been very good. We've had a lot of strong local groups who have been involved in building the Resist G7 coalition, which is what's come together to oppose the G7. And what we wanted to do was to try and bring as many diverse groups as possible together with a strong code of conduct that includes not talking to the cops, that includes a respect of a diversity of tactics, but is a mechanism for people to work together, because we wanted to get away from the divide and rule, the good and bad protesters, the kind of like, you go here and do that and you're lovely and the rest of you are horrible, and celebrate our strengths and celebrate the ways in which we can work together. So we've got a range of groups that have come together, from anarchist groups to local community groups to more mainstream groups like CND and Stop the War. We've got a coalition of Kashmiri groups that are opposing Modi, who are planning to come down and really want to get that message about what's happening in India and in Kashmir amplified through the G7. Peace in Kurdistan, campaign against criminalising communities. So we're trying to bring together a lot of these themes around the G7 and a lot of the groups together in a framework that we can work together. So we've got camping accommodation available in Cornwall from the 9th of June. If there is accessible camping available, but if people have any access needs, please get in touch with us so that we can make sure that we can do what we can. And then we've got 3 days of actions planned, and a day. So we've got a day of workshops on the 10th. Then we've got a day of action over climate justice and the climate crisis on the Friday. And that will see the first ever climate strike since lockdown in England being held, both in Cornwall and internationally as well, in support of it. And it's been really exciting to see that coming together and have the youth leading what's happening on the Friday. So we're really happy to be sort of supporting that. Then on the Saturday, we've got an internationalist day of action, and details about where that will be and some more information about that will probably be coming out next week. And that's really about bringing together so many of the sort of issues that we were talking about earlier, and in particularly highlighting the issues of the self-determination of people, so self-determination of people of Kashmir, of Palestine, of Kurdistan, and indeed of Cornwall, because Cornwall does have a strong independence movement that's often laughed at and dismissed as in a way that people would never do with independence movements in Wales and Scotland, etc. So, you know, it's quite important for us that that is also a part of that international struggle and solidarity, and also sort of action against the sort of arms trade and just the colonialist policies of the G7 generally. Then on the Sunday, we've got a day of action about repression and surveillance. And as part of that, we're organising a Kill the Bill Cornwall G7 special. Details of that will be released nearer the time, but it will be happening. And we're really encouraging everyone who wants to come down. And it will be brilliant to welcome people to Cornwall. But if you can't come down and you want to organise solidarity actions or protests along those themes of those days in your own towns, cities, villages, whatever it is, that would be amazing. And sort of tag us on Twitter and use the Resist G7 hashtag so that we can show that what's happening, just, you know, that there's resistance, not just in Cornwall, but all over the place. And we can bring sort of all those issues together. In terms of the policing, sort of talking about the Repression and Surveillance Day, the police are playing a really strange PR game at the moment. They're trying to say that they're lovely and fluffy, Devon and Cornwall Police. They're not like other police forces. You know, we're not going to get, you know, all their briefings have been like, oh, it's not going to be like, you know, when you see sort of other police forces out on the streets. We don't do that. But it's a load of bullshit and it's a total lie. So even just looking at statistics, if you're black in Cornwall, you're 12 times more likely to be stopped and searched than if you're a white person. That is higher than the national average. You're 9.5 times more likely to have force used on you if you're a black person in Cornwall. Devon and Cornwall Police were up in Bristol, part of the policing operation against the Kill the Bill protesters there. Devon and Cornwall Police were seen slamming shields into the heads of protesters, sitting on the ground with their hands in the air. I've had several very violent and nasty experiences with Devon and Cornwall Police. It's also a total lie that they're going to be totally leading this operation. We've got mutual aid coming in from every police force in the country. It'll be 5,500 extra cops. And there is absolutely no way that Devon and Cornwall Police will really be in charge of what's happening. That is just, it's just a fantasy. And even if they were, this kind of facade of community policing that we're going to engage and we're going to respect your right to protest is utter bullshit. So we've already seen harassment of people starting in Cornwall. Someone involved with Ocean Rebellion had a visit from a load of cops sniffing around the boatyard where he lives. There's people have started to be sort of stopped when driving, and it's all quite low level at the moment, but we can feel it ramping up down here, and we can sort of feel the pressure of it ramping up down here. In terms of exclusion zones, there's a map on our website that the police have put out that shows the exclusion zones around Carbis Bay, and like every other global summit, it will be kind of like the red zone where it's really difficult to get through and will be closely guarded. All the traffic, so Carbis Bay runs down to St Ives, and there's one road through and there's a back road through, so all the traffic's been diverted through the back road, and it is going to be chaos. So for people who don't know Cornwall, we don't have any motorways. West Cornwall, we have very few dual carriageway roads. So it's not like, I was talking to someone about Stirling the other day and the demos we had there against what was then the G8. And it's not even like there's a big motorway or sort of something like that when we sort of took the motorway there. And it is going to be chaos. And so that's the other thing that we've been saying a lot locally, is just sort of making the point that it is not protesters who are causing the disruption. Yes, we do want to disrupt the G7. We do not want it to take place. We want to do stuff that highlights this. We don't want to go to the 3-4 protest sites that the police have allocated in their kindness, that are, one is in Exeter, it's like 100 miles away, it's not even in Cornwall. The other one is half a car park in Falmouth, and the other one's in a park in Truro where no one will have any idea what's going on. So the police kind of like have totally missed the point of protest, but they will use those sites as an excuse to say that they have facilitated protest and given people the option to protest. But even without our protests, the disruption that the G7 will bring to Cornwall, and West Cornwall in particular, is massive, because it already is during the summer. And when we've got chaos on the roads at the moment because it's half term and everyone's come down here. And I think it's a really important message that people locally need to sort of get out, and we have been getting out, in that the police are trying to other protesters. You know, it's kind of like the G7 has an impact, protest causes disruption is the language that they're using a lot. And so we have been getting out the message that we're welcoming people to come and protest. We want everyone to come and protest, but there are local people, you know, even my neighbours, you know, who aren't political, they're angry about what's happening. They're angry about the disruption that's being caused. They don't see why it's coming here. They don't understand why it can't be done on Zoom, and they know it will be chaos. And, you know, for example, I've got a son at college. He has to get a bus to college. No one at college has spoken to them about the fact that all their buses will be hideously delayed because they have to go on the main road that goes past where all the restrictions are to get there. So this sort of fallacy that protesters are going to be causing all the problems is absolutely ridiculous. And actually, you know, a lot of people are welcoming and want protesters to come. I think the other thing that's worth sort of talking about is it won't be like other summits for a few reasons. One, it's been organised at very, very short notice. We've had much more notice for other summits we've mobilised for. The second was that the first part of that mobilisation, and up until quite recently, we didn't know where we were with COVID, whether we felt comfortable inviting people down, and where that situation would be. We're now at the point where restrictions have eased enough and where the figures have been such that we are happy making that call. We also took the decision quite early on that if we got to the point where tourists and second homeowners would be invited down here, then it became a class issue, that rich people were invited to Cornwall, but those of us who wanted to protest, those of us who didn't have the money to spend £2,000 a week on a fucking rental, could come to Cornwall and be welcome to Cornwall. And that's been the other part of the messaging locally that we've really wanted to sort of make clear, because it's not right that rich people can come and visit, but everyone else can't. But because of that, and it's been a sort of slow process in terms of mobilisation, and also in terms of international mobilisation. That's been pretty impossible with the pandemic, because people can't afford to come and they can't afford to do the sort of self-isolation that they need to do, and that international element just can't happen in the same way that it has done before, unfortunately. But we've done our best, and it's been amazing for Cornwall. So there's a lot of criticism about opposing global summits, about this kind of like circus summit hopping and sort of stuff that we used to do. For me, I've always looked at this as what legacy we can build, both in terms of movement building and what we're doing with a coalition and groups coming together, but also in terms of what we can build in Cornwall. And I think it has been so inspiring to see the radical community coming together in Cornwall, and we feel on the ground here that we are building a legacy and putting Cornwall on the map as somewhere where radical politics does happen in a way that hasn't happened before. And that's something we're looking forward to building on after the summit's over, when we can look at, well, we've got these things in place now. What do we do with them? What campaigns do we want to run? How do we want to sort of envisage the future and build the future that we want here? And we just really hope that as many people as possible do feel able to come and join us, come to our campsite, offer to do workshops. We need drivers, we need minibuses, we need funds. And it's really just everyone needs crew, turn up, get involved, help out, see what you can do. And, you know, let's make this a really, really powerful piece of resistance and show what we can do together.
Cool. So the plan from here on was to have a bit of a Q&A. So like, I think if you're on the YouTube, whatever, you can type in the comments and the facilitator will bring it back to us. However, I've incidentally been given 3 questions. I don't know if it's from the stream or just random. So I think I'm just going to go through these 3 questions first and kind of just get these out of the way. I don't even know if they're watching or if it's random, but so someone wanted to know about like what is the whole climate reset? What's the whole eco thing that the G7 are doing? They worded it in a paragraph, but some more information on that. And I kind of skirted over that, which is kind of a shame as I was bumming along. But like, it's one of the major things that Britain is doing for this like event, this summit, and it's because like obviously climate is a major issue, and the thing is it's not quite in line with like, you know, saving the planet, you know, making a better world. It's about trade. Okay, so if we look at the 2015 Paris climate meeting or whatever, right, that was significantly funded by the major fossil fuel companies, large carbon emitters and emission trading companies. That they have their future planning, they're future-proofing their corporations, right? So we all know that they're greenwashing already, pretending they don't murder dolphins and whales and they're not polluting the North Sea and all this kind of stuff. But the truth is they are. And the truth is that they are simply ensuring that BP, that Shell, that all these kind of like Vale, the Rio Tinto, all these kind of companies that like devastate our planet are going to be there in the future. They're still going to be earning profit. And one of the ways in which they do this is by like transferring their kind of like their assets, their industries that they're investing in to these green capitalist stuff. And like one of the interesting studies I was reading the other day is from 2016, and it said that we have more tree cover in the world now than we did 35 years ago, right? And that sounds wild. We have more trees, more tree cover at least now than we did 35 years ago, right? So this is like the South America is down 431,000 square kilometers, right? And Africa is only down 5,000 square kilometers. This was before the big fires in 2018. But Europe is up 741,000 square kilometers. North America is 378,000 square kilometers, and Asia is 992,000 square kilometers. And so how is it? And the reality is these are industrial timber plantations. palm oil estates like that have been devastating old growth forests, and just like, you know, particularly in the Pacific Islands and stuff like this. And you know, the reality is that this tree cover, while it might be like increasing in volume, it's not increasing in biodiversity. It's not increasing in improving the wilderness. It's all about growth. And this has come at the same time that we're actually seeing the decline in deserts, mountainous areas, tundra, things like that. And part of it's the influence of climate change. Part of it is agriculture pushing further out into what, you know, the global elite consider wasteland. And when we talk about like offsetting carbon and things like that, that's what we're putting into, you know, renewable resources that, you know, Western corporations own. And like the same thing is like found in like minerals and stuff like this, and the assets of Africa, South America, and the Pacific. You know, there is a massive trade war going on to secure the future of these corporations and their global hegemony. And it's a weird thing that we're seeing, because as we're running up to COP26, we're seeing more of this rhetoric about how this beautiful Tory government cares about us. Really, they you know, they're the working class ones. Really, they care about, you know, the less economically developed countries or whatever, and you know, they're trying to improve the world for us all. But like it doesn't even pass the slightest mustering. Like they got David Attenborough up at COP26. He's a spokesperson for COP26, right? So they're trying to sell COP26 as like the bright new future, how the good world's governments are going to save us all from all these evil industries. They're the evil industries. They're the ones profiting. Them and their business partners. It's not even hard to find out. These people have names, they have addresses, they have business offices, they have headquarters around the world, and they employ millions of people to destroy our planet, right? And if they want to like lay waste to the Amazon and the Congo Basin and let the fires burn, so be it, as long as it doesn't get in the way of trade. The last G7 that they were going to have, the one that was cancelled in Camp David, the 46th one, right? So this was last year. They invited Bolsonaro, the right-wing premier of Brazil, to it because they want to secure that partnership. They want to write that future. And this is deeply concerning. This is why the other major camp of organizing, XR, and I know XR, you know, some people like them, some people don't like them. I'm not going to get into all that, but that's why they're so focused on organizing here too, because this climate issue is such a major factor that whether or not you think the world's going to end in 12 years or whatever, it's changing the world now, and people are dying now. You know, islands are being flooded, ecosystems are falling apart, glaciers are disappearing at a massive rate, tundra forests just getting laid waste to. And we've got blinkers because, hey, Shell's going to save us. BP are bringing us windmills now. And it's the same nonsense like every single time there's been a major transition between fuel source, like whether it was coal or steam or anything like that, you know, the corporations have just moved on. You know, they're bringing electric cars and things like that. And that's not because they care about the planet. It's because they care about profit. You know, as they're selling us electric cars and talking about, oh, how this is going to be great for us, they're not talking about the lithium mines where they've got children working, dying to bring us, you know, cheaper batteries. Like Elon Musk, like the world's wealthiest man, like he's some kind of savior, as he's literally, quite literally destroying our planet for our all new bright green future. And this is something that, you know, even if you're not like ELF, like hardcore eco rights, you should be, but like, you know, this is something that we've all got to step up to and wake up from. It's not just about class. It's not just about the working class suffering under these despots. It's about opposing the broad spectrum destruction that they're bringing, because capitalism is destroying our planet and we need to fight back against it. And you should do that at G7. You should organize. If you're not able to get down, you should organize in your local communities on the Saturday, not on the Saturday, sorry, on the Friday, and, you know, take action in whatever way you can, wherever you are, whether it's London, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Lanark, Leeds, do something, make a noise, you know, because the more we're talking about this, but the more we're resisting it, and the more we won't let our future be written by these corporations and governments who think that they own everybody on this planet, because they don't. The next question I got here is some more information about the camp and what the camp is and where the camp's going to be. Sam, do you want to take that on? Like, I know we're not revealing where the camp is, but maybe we could talk a bit more about how people are going to find out about that and stuff.
So we will be releasing details nearer the time. It is safe camping that we secured. We will have minibuses to help people arriving by public transport to get there, because Cornwall being Cornwall, it is really hard getting around. So we will have buses and stuff like that we can help with. But anybody who drives, anybody who's got a minibus, they can bring down and get involved with like rotas for drivers and stuff would be really, really, really appreciated. And if you're sort of heading to Cornwall and want to know where to come to, if you come to sort of mid-west Cornwall, so say sort of Truro sort of areas of Cornwall, in terms of your planning, that's a sort of rough sort of mid-Cornwall point. But we will be releasing more information. We've got a Telegram channel, so that's going to be the best way to get information about camping as it's released and about the other actions. And it's like, because of all the sort of police interest and police trying to harass landowners and stuff like that, and we just want to restrict telling people where things are for as long as we possibly can. But people should know that camping is sorted, that it will be free, but we will be asking for donations. So our recommended donation for camping for the from the 9th to the Sunday is 20 quid. But it's kind of like, if you can't afford that, that's fine. If you can afford to give more, please do.
So we'll be operating our old school kind of rave party line, like get on the Telegram and then it'll pop up. This is where we're at. Let's get down here, help us set up. I think it's sort of important that we mention that the Resist G7 coalition, you know, we are helping to organize stuff that the various members of the various member groups and individuals, we're helping them to facilitate and organize events and stuff like that. But we're not, you don't have to take part in our events. Okay, so the whole reason that we decided to set up a separate camp from what other organizations are doing is that we wanted to make sure that there was absolutely no police communication. We wanted to make sure that there was absolutely no booking, and we wanted to make sure there was absolutely no kind of like doctrinal, like, this is our show, do what we say, you're at our protest. You know, come down, use our facilities as you need fit. If you need a minibus to go to a random location and you're just going to go do whatever, we'll help you with the minibus. You know, like, we're not there to dictate where people protest or how people protest. We're just there to kind of make sure that people aren't sleeping in the bushes. You know, do bring a tent. You're going to need that. It is a field. It's a well-equipped field. So, you know, I wouldn't necessarily worry about stuff, but, you know, bring food, bring water. You know, it's probably going to be nice and hot. And if you're out either on a march or, you know, protesting directly, you're going to need to hydrate. So, you know, bring a bottle, stuff like that, you know, sensible stuff. We're going to release some more information about that because, you know, it's important not just for like people's health and safety, but also that people have informed consent about what they're doing. All right, yeah, you come into a G7. This isn't, I mean, we could be astonished to find that it's the most civil, nicely policed protest ever. But the G7s have a lot of history with a lot of aggressive policing, and you know, this is just something that people should be aware about. And so what we're doing to facilitate that is we've got you know, a team of medics and stuff like that, and mental health specialists to like help people through stuff. You know, we're providing like a safe space for people to come and relax. Like if things get a bit blurry, you know, like, you don't feel like you have to be involved in that. You know, we're going to have workshops, we're going to have talks, we're going to have the more community building stuff, and you know, we're keeping it nice and broad. Everybody is welcome. You know, providing not fascists, so that like you know, come down and, you know, once again, if you can't organize in your local area. So the other question that someone sent me, I sent them a bit of my detail for my plan for this. And being a bit of a devil's advocate, they said, isn't global security handy and useful? And, aren't we in the apparently we're in the most peaceful period in the world ever. I don't know if that's accurate. I suspect it might not be or something, but like, I'm sure Sam's got some thoughts on this too, but I'll just jump in this idea that if we have this beautiful capitalist, neoliberal, false democratic kind of governance, like this macro economic state over us, and it's going to bring us all peace and unity. Like it comes out of World War II, right? So after World War II, the League of Nations formed, the UN formed, the NATO bloc, all these different organizations came together, and they were opposed to the Soviet Union, which was saying the same thing. If we're all together, we'll be stronger and it'll be better for everyone. And on either side of that coin, the working class are getting squished, right? They were in Russia, they were in the USSR, they were in the Western Bloc, right? And even though Russia joined the G7 to make it the G8 for a few years, nothing changed. It's all about finance. And to hammer that point home, recently we've had the whole situation with the Israeli airstrikes and stuff on the Gaza Strip. And they're saying, oh, well, it's Hamas's fault. It's Hamas. They're the ones to blame. Ignoring the fact that Hamas don't own every single building in Gaza unless their rent must be really high because there's over 100 airstrikes and stuff like that. And, they've killed countless countable civilians, but this brutality. And this is a major issue right now that we're seeing horrendous stuff go on, and the ceasefire completely ignored. And this stuff doesn't come out of the blue. Israel isn't an island on its own. It is supported by the G7, right? 6 of the 7 countries in the G7 invest billions in funding Israel with arms, right? So this year alone, the USA did a £6.5 billion deal with Israel, right? Since in 2019, Canada did a trade deal for £8 million in arms, right? And weaponry, tanks and stuff like that, right? Between 1998 and 2019, Italy did 479 million in trade with Israel. Between 2001 and 2018, Germany did 2.3 million. France did 1.7 million, and since 1998, we've done 559 million pounds in trade for selling arms from Elbrit and organizations like that just produce all these weapons that are shipped over to fascist regimes to murder civilians. And it's not just Israel. I think the riot vans that were used in the Arab Spring to run people down on the street were made in Britain. Yeah, whether it's in Libya, Tunisia, Saudi Arabia, these weapon systems are coming from countries in the G7, right? And that's something that's happening. This is, they talk a great game about being caring and loving and building a better world, but it's a lie. Sam, do you have anything to say about global security?
I mean, I think just adding to that, and I think actually the arms trade is the sort of ultimate example of why that isn't the case. All the countries that are part of the G7 are major arms dealers, and sort of arming Erdogan in Turkey is another big one. Erdogan's currently invading areas of Syria, repressing Kurdish populations in Bakur, the Kurdish regions of Turkey, with weapons that are made in the UK, that are made by other G7 countries. And that's kind of typical of the whole way the system works. It works through the oppression and screwing over of ordinary people so that we can sell weapons, so that companies like Shell can carry on destroying the climate. It's not based on actually trying to find a way that we can all work together and have global security. Global security is rubbish if we're arming people, if we're bombing people. If I'm sitting here in Cornwall and my existence is subsidized by the fact that children are being bombed because our country makes money from weapons. That isn't good enough. That is not global security. And that is part of the whole system that we need to dismantle and destroy as part of our opposition to things like the G7.
I see we got about 6 minutes left. I guess, were there any questions on YouTube that we should bring over?
Yeah, definitely. There's quite a few. So one that I can start with is, what are some kind of examples of specific tactics you use when resisting to G7? I know you mentioned marches and protesting, but do you do like picket lines, sabotage, awareness raising? Like, what does it kind of look like more concretely?
It will look like whatever people want it to look like. You turn up. We, as a coalition, we respect diversity of tactics. So we respect, what people want to come and do, people want to come and do. And it's very hard for us as well, because especially with the pandemic, we actually don't have a clue on numbers. So it's really difficult to sort of formulate plans. So from our perspective, it's who turns up, it's having those meetings, it's having those conversations with each other. If people want to turn up in affinity groups and go off and do stuff, please do. That would be fantastic. We don't need to know about it. Go do it, and then let us know afterwards. If people want to get involved in bigger things, in blocks, there will be facilitated spaces at camp for people to come together and discuss what they want to do, because it's down to the people who turn up, not down to us what happens on the streets.
Wow. Okay, and then kind of in line with that, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the code of conduct and how you organize your groups. There was a question asking how you feel about like the Extinction Rebellion groups coming and having their own plans for each day, even if they don't fully align with the coalition's plans. So I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, so with Extinction Rebellion, we did do some work to try and all be part of the same coalition that didn't work for various reasons. So where we are now is we have a communications agreement, and we're supporting each other's protests, and we're like just really glad on both sides that different voices are coming together in different places. For us, with our code of conduct, having a strict line on no communication with the police as a coalition was an absolute, and like one that we weren't prepared to compromise on. The same way as a coalition, we were not comfortable with adding the words peaceful or non-violent to our code of conduct, because they're meaningless terms and they're classist terms, and we didn't want to go there. But in terms of people coming together and resisting the summit and being happy about everyone coming together and those sort of key messages, we're very much unified on that. In terms of the coalition, we have a delegate structure. So people who want to read our code of conduct is on our website. So groups who agree with our code of conduct can sign up and be part of the coalition. And then we have, at the moment, we have a delegate structure and regular delegates meetings. And that's how our sort of decision-making sort of process is formed, through that, through consensus, through the delegate groups and things being fed in and out of those groups. Our actual, when we actually have the sort of site, that will run slightly differently, because that will be sort of run through the same kind of like consensus models and non-hierarchical models, but with the people actually on site rather than through the delegate groups. And if people want to get involved who aren't part of delegate groups, they can get in contact, and there's sort of like loads of stuff going on that people can get in contact with, or different groups in their areas.
Yeah, that's great. And then you've hinted at this before, but I was wondering if you could expand on some of the challenges you faced, especially organizing internationally. I can imagine that's extremely difficult, especially with the pandemic. I mean, I'm sure it was very, very challenging before the pandemic as well. But how has the pandemic kind of changed the way you operate, and what are some of the like biggest challenges you face, getting everybody together?
So I think I think the pandemic's been the biggest challenge because, I mean, even just nationally, we didn't know whether it would feel safe to ask people to sort of come to Cornwall. And then mobilising internationally, like we haven't been able to do international meetings in the same way that we would with normal summits. And we have got support from international groups, and that, and brilliant. And we want to get, if there are international groups here who want to do solidarity actions as well, that would be absolutely brilliant, because it is, sort of G7 summits, those sorts of protests have always been very internationalist, and that's always been fantastic and about sort of linking up our movements. And that's one of the things that I feel quite sad about, that we haven't been able to do with this one because of the pandemic. And I think just generally, so it's fantastic being able to do like the Edinburgh Book Fair here and being able to do it on Zoom. But in terms of, and I actually, living in Cornwall and finding it really, like, it is expensive getting in and out of Cornwall. So, being able to do so much on Zoom generally has been quite good. But at the same time, it doesn't replace face-to-face meetings. It doesn't replace kind of like us all being able to have meetings around the country and travel around and all those kind of normal networking things that you would do with a summit. So it feels a bit, we just don't know. We just want people to come. We want people to resist. We want people to get involved. But it's made it a lot harder to get a sense of what people are thinking and what they want to get involved in, I guess, would be the way to do it. In terms of getting to Cornwall, that was one thing I forgot to mention. There's an app called the Pasty Connection, which links up people who want to travel into the West Country. And they've given us free access for people coming to oppose the G7, and you need to use the code HAGGIS, and you can get free access to the Pasty Connection and join up and get lift chairs down here.
Okay, great. And then the last question was kind of something I was wondering personally, and if you don't want to answer it, that's okay. But my question is, like, how do you stay motivated, or what gives you strength to resist the G7? Because it sounds like you, not only are you kind of going against the local police, which seems to be very actively like acting as aggressors, but you're also, and not only are you going against the government of your country, but you're going against the like top 7 most powerful countries with huge militaries. What gives you strength to keep on going and to like be resisting this like huge force?
So for me, it's been various things. I mean, in fairness, when I started 2021, the last thing I thought I was going to be doing was organising against the G7 summit on my doorstep. It's like literally 10 minutes away from my house. What's given me strength through this process has been the youth-led movements that have been absolutely inspirational. How people have come together in Cornwall, the alternatives that we can build, and looking at the alternative structures that we can build and what we do moving forward, and kind of looking at it as a legacy of, this is what we have to oppose on a global scale, but how do we break that down? How do we move forward with that? How do we challenge that? And, and the flip side of that, it's kind of like with Kill the Bill stuff and things like that. It is absolutely horrendous, the legislation that we're opposing, but how you build that resistance, and then you get to have the conversations about policing, you get to have the conversations about defunding the police, you get to have abolitionist conversations. And some of these conversations are ones that I never thought that I would be able to stand on the streets of Cornwall and have and be well received. So those kind of things give me hope. They give me inspiration that things don't need to be like that people are moving in other directions, and they're just looking for ways to sort of harness that power. Then we do have that collective power. It's what we do with it and how we use it. And that's where we need to be sort of focusing.
I guess if I could just jump in real quick before we finish there. For me, I think it's definitely seeing people who have never experienced that they have power realize it. When you're like, there's a lot of contention between activism and organizing, and it's a big thing that gets bandied around in, you know, organizer circles and activist circles. However, like, helping to facilitate something, helping to create something, and then bringing people together and like introducing new people to the fact that like they do have power, and this idea that a single person can't affect a movement isn't true. Everybody can. Even if there's only a few of you in your local town, hit the street, talk to somebody, print out a few leaflets. We're going to put out some kind of dummy leaflets that you can put in your own stuff, make those PDFs available in the next week, probably. Like, print them, go out, even if there's 3 of you. Obviously, stay safe, but like, you know, little paste table, few leaflets, just start talking to people. Help people realize that there is a future that we're building and we're in it together. And, you know, we can build a better world. And it starts with people getting involved. So that's why I stick around. I guess we're out of time, are we?
Yeah, wow, thank you so much, both Peter and Sam, for all your time. You guys are amazing. This was extremely interesting to listen to, and I'm excited for like your organizing in the upcoming month. So thank you everyone who tuned in. There's links to our feedback in the chat and also our donation, and then we'll add information for that Peter and Sam provided in the YouTube video as well. So thank you, everybody. Is there anything else you want to say before we stop the live stream?
Check out the Twitter where we're mostly posting stuff, and join that Telegram. There's not going to be stuff on the Telegram much, but like you'll be thankful of the day. Yeah.
Where can we find those links?
Resist G7 Twitter, I guess. I will share them with Edinburgh's stuff. Have them share. Cool.
Awesome. Thank you very much.